Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. I grew up hearing stories about running at night. My father and uncles would sit around the fire pit behind our house, voices low and steady as they spoke about pounding dirt roads beneath skies crowded with stars that seemed close enough to touch. For Navajo people, running isn't just about fitness or competition. It's woven into who we are, threaded through our traditions like the patterns in my grandmother's rugs. My father used to say that running brought clarity, that it connected you to something ancient and powerful sleeping beneath the red earth of the reservation. I thought about those stories as I sat on my grandmother's sagging porch near Shiprock, lacing up my running shoes in the fading afternoon light. It was early February, and I'd come home from Northern Arizona University for a long weekend, desperately needing a break from the suffocating routine of lectures and cramped dorm rooms. The campus felt artificial somehow, all concrete and forced socialization. I missed the vast silence of home, the way the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, the way you could stand outside and hear nothing but wind for hours. The evening air carried that particular high desert cold that cuts through clothing and settles in your bones. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the distant mesas in shades of rust and gold. I pulled my jacket tight and zipped it to my throat, then tugged my hood over my head. My grandmother had gone into town to visit her sister, and the house behind me sat empty and quiet. I started down the dirt road that curved away from her property, heading toward the old cattle trail that wound past Red Rock Wash. My breath came out in visible clouds, and the packed earth crunched satisfyingly beneath my shoes. This was exactly what I needed. Solitude, familiar ground, the meditative rhythm of my own footfalls. No roommates, no deadlines, no noise, just me and the desert and the falling dark. The first mile felt perfect. My muscles warmed gradually, finding their rhythm. My lungs adapted to the thin air I'd grown up breathing. The landscape rolled past in its familiar way, scrub brush, scattered juniper, the skeletal remains of a long abandoned fence line. I'd run this route 100 times growing up, knew every dip and rise in the road. But as I crested the small hill near the old windmill, something pulled my attention sideways. A coyote stood motionless on the ridge about 40 yards distant, silhouetted against the darkening sky. It was larger than most I'd seen, its coat thick and healthy looking, even from this distance. That wasn't unusual. Coyotes were everywhere out here, especially at dusk when they started hunting, but something about this one made me slow my pace. It was watching me, not just glancing in my direction the way animals usually did before bolting, but watching, staring. Its eyes caught the last rays of sunlight and reflected them back at me, two small points of light fixed and steady. I kept running, but slower now, my heart rate climbing for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. The coyote remained perfectly still, its head tracking my movement as I passed. I tried to tell myself this was normal behavior, that animals were curious, that there was nothing wrong, but my stomach had tightened into a cold knot, and the back of my neck prickled with instinctive unease. Just a coyote, I muttered aloud, needing to hear something besides my own breathing and footsteps. Just an animal. I forced myself not to look back as the road curved and the ridge disappeared behind me. My pace had quickened without my conscious decision, and I realized my hands were clenched into fists. I tried to relax, rolling my shoulders, shaking out the tension, but it wouldn't leave. The road straightened out, running parallel to a long berm that separated the trail from the lower scrubland. My shadow stretched long and thin ahead of me, growing longer as the sun continued its descent. The temperature was dropping noticeably now, and I could feel the cold working through my jacket, making my joints ache slightly. That's when I saw it again. The same coyote. It had to be the same one, was moving along the top of the berm, keeping perfect pace with me. Not running exactly, but loping effortlessly, its movements fluid and silent. I couldn't hear its footfalls at all, despite the fact that the ground up there was loose dirt and scattered rocks that should have made noise. My throat went dry. I picked up my speed, pushing harder, my breath coming faster. The coyote adjusted immediately, maintaining the exact same distance, never falling behind, never pulling ahead. It moved like water, like shadow, like something that weighed nothing at all. This wasn't right. This wasn't natural behavior. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away, to break line of sight, to run faster. But even as I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs and the stitch developing in my side, the coyote stayed with me, effortless, silent, watching. The old water tank appeared ahead, its rusted metal sides glowing orange in the sunset. My father had brought me here years ago to hunt rabbits, teaching me patience and respect for the animals we took. It had always been a good memory, but now the sight of it filled me with dread because I knew somehow, I knew what I would see when I got closer. The coyote stood directly in the middle of the road ahead of me, motionless once again, staring, waiting. I skidded to a halt, chest heaving, my breath ragged and painful. My legs trembled, and it wasn't from exertion. The animal was less than 30 feet away, close enough that I could see its chest expanding with breath, could see the precise way its ears stood erect and forward-facing. But that was impossible. I hadn't seen it leave the berm. I hadn't heard it pass me. The road was straight for a good quarter-mile. There was nowhere it could have gone. No way it could have gotten in front of me without my seeing it. Unless it had never been on the berm at all. Unless I was seeing something that couldn't exist. My hands shook as I bent forward, trying to catch my breath, trying to think. The coyote didn't move, didn't blink, just watched me with those reflecting eyes, and in the growing darkness they seemed to glow with their own light. I had to leave. Every cell in my body was telling me to run, to get away, to break this frozen moment before something terrible happened. I straightened slowly, keeping my eyes on the animal, and began backing up. 1 step, 2. The coyote's head tilted slightly, following my movement. Then I turned and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, abandoning any pretense of pacing or control. Pure panic drove me, primal and overwhelming. The road blurred beneath my feet. My lungs burned. The cold air felt like knives in my throat with every gasping breath. But I didn't slow down, couldn't slow down. The desert had gone completely silent around me. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the thundering of my heart, and the desperate slap of my shoes against the packed dirt. Even my breathing seemed muffled somehow, swallowed by the vast emptiness surrounding me. Isaac. I nearly tripped, my legs tangling as my whole body jerked at the sound. My name, spoken clearly, calmly, right beside my ear, spoken in my own voice. Not whispered, not distant, right there, as if I'd spoken it myself, except I hadn't. My mouth was open, gasping for air, forming no words at all, but I'd heard it, perfectly clear. My own voice calling my own name from somewhere impossibly close. I forced myself to run faster, ignoring the fire spreading through my muscles, the spots dancing at the edges of my vision. Sweat ran down my face despite the cold stinging my eyes. My hood had fallen back and the freezing air bit at my ears. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered, except getting away. The voice came again, and this time it was right behind me, matching my pace perfectly. Isaac, why are you running? It was me. My exact voice, my inflection, my tone, like listening to a recording of myself, except it came from outside, from the darkness gathering on all sides. My stomach heaved, and for a moment I thought I might vomit, but I swallowed hard and kept running. Don't look back. Don't look. Don't stop. Don't acknowledge it. The words ran through my head like a prayer, drowning out the voice that kept calling my name, kept asking questions in my own stolen voice. I fixed my eyes on the road ahead, searching desperately for lights, for any sign of the scattered hogans and trailers that dotted this area. Then I glanced down at the road just for a second, and my heart seemed to stop entirely. 2 sets of footprints ran side by side through the dust. Mine on the right, clear and deep, and beside them, matching my stride exactly, another set of prints. The same shoes, the same spacing, the same depth, as if I were running alongside myself, casting 2 shadows instead of 1. A sound escaped my throat, something between a sob and a scream. I pushed harder, my vision narrowing to a tunnel, everything going dark around the edges. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But the prints were there, clear as day in the dirt, running parallel to mine, never deviating. Lights appeared ahead, distant but real. Samuel Begay's Hogan, its windows glowing warm and yellow against the gathering dark. Samuel was my father's age, maybe older. A quiet man who knew stories and songs most people had forgotten. My father trusted him completely, called him when he needed guidance, listened carefully to his advice. I ran toward those lights like they were salvation itself, my legs screaming in protest, my lungs raw and burning. The distance seemed impossible, as if I were running in place while the lights stayed eternally out of reach. The silence pressed down on me like weight, suffocating and complete. Then Samuel was there, standing in his doorway, his face grave and knowing. He reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me across the threshold with surprising strength. "Inside," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the haze of panic. "Now." He slammed the door shut behind me, and immediately slid the bolt home, the metal clicking into place with a sound that seemed too final, too permanent. I collapsed against the wall, my legs finally giving out. The room spun around me, and I couldn't seem to pull enough air into my lungs. Sweat soaked through my clothes despite the cold, making me shiver violently. My hands shook so badly I had to clench them into fists to make them stop. Samuel moved quickly, his weathered hands reaching for bundles of dried plants hanging from the rafters. Cedar and sage, their scents sharp and cleansing. He lit them without a word, and thick smoke began filling the small space, making my eyes water. But I didn't complain. The smoke felt protective somehow, like armor between me and whatever waited outside in the dark. I tried to speak, to explain what had happened, but Samuel held up one hand sharply. "Not yet," he said quietly, his voice firm. "Don't speak about it, not until we're ready." He moved around the Hogan with practiced efficiency, sprinkling ash across the threshold in a careful line, placing smooth stones at precise intervals. His face was set in concentration, lips moving silently in words I couldn't quite hear. The urgency in his movements terrified me more than anything else had. If Samuel was worried, truly worried, then I was right to be afraid. I huddled in the chair he pointed me toward, trying to steady my breathing, trying to stop shaking. The room was warm from a small wood stove in the corner, but I couldn't seem to get warm. Cold had settled deep in my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the February weather outside. Samuel finished his preparations and knelt by the door, placing a final stone carefully. Only then did he turn to look at me, his dark eyes steady and serious. "You ran past Red Rock Wash," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. His jaw tightened. "I told your father, years ago, never to run there after sunset." He listened. He remembered. Samuel's eyes searched my face. "He should have told you." A gust of wind hit the Hogan suddenly, violent and angry. The walls shuddered. The door rattled against its bolt. I jumped, every muscle tensing, but Samuel didn't flinch. He reached for a leather pouch hanging on the wall and began removing items from it with steady hands. "What was it?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse and broken. Samuel didn't answer immediately. He laid out herbs and small carved objects on the worn table, his movements deliberate and calm. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Something old, something that doesn't follow the rules we understand. It noticed you. It called my name," I whispered, in my own voice. "How?" "It takes things," Samuel interrupted quietly. "Voices, shapes, whatever it needs to get your attention." He looked at me directly, his gaze intense. "But it can't come inside. Not here. Not tonight." He began chanting softly in Navajo, words that I recognized the sound of but couldn't fully translate. The rhythm was soothing, steady, like a heartbeat. Outside, the wind grew stronger, howling around the Hogan, throwing dirt against the windows. But Samuel's voice never wavered, never faltered. I don't know how long we sat there. Time seemed to stretch and distort, minutes feeling like hours. The smoke from the burning herbs made the room hazy, dreamlike. Samuel continued his low chanting, occasionally adding more cedar to the bundle. The wind outside rose and fell in waves, sometimes shrieking, sometimes dropping to an eerie silence that was somehow worse. Every sound made me tense. Every pause in Samuel's chanting sent my heart racing. I kept expecting something to crash through the door, to break through the windows, to announce itself with some terrible violence, but nothing came. The night wore on, and we remained sealed in this small circle of protection, while something patient and old waited outside in the dark. Around midnight, or what I guessed was midnight, having no way to check, Samuel finally stopped chanting. The sudden silence was jarring. He rolled his shoulders, working out the stiffness, and moved to peer through the small window beside the door. "Is it gone?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, but it's waiting. It's always waiting." "Why me?" The question came out more desperate than I'd intended. "Why tonight? What did I do?" Samuel turned from the window, his face shadowed and tired. "You didn't do anything. These things, they choose. Maybe they sense something, loneliness or loss, or some opening in your spirit. Maybe you were just in the wrong place. It doesn't matter why. What matters is that you didn't answer it." "I did answer," I said, remembering the voice, the way it had called my name. "I heard it say my name and You ran," Samuel interrupted firmly. "You didn't speak back to it. You didn't acknowledge what it was. That's what saved you. If you'd answered, if you tried to have a conversation with it," he trailed off, turning back to the window. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly colder than ever. What would have happened? You wouldn't have made it to my door. The simplicity of his answer was more frightening than any elaborate explanation could have been. I sat there processing this, while Samuel kept his vigil at the window. The wind had died down to nothing, replaced by a silence so complete it felt unnatural. No coyotes howling in the distance. No dogs barking from nearby homes. Nothing. "It's not an animal," Samuel said quietly, more to himself than to me. "It never was. It just uses that shape because it's familiar, because we're used to seeing coyotes out there. Makes us hesitate, makes us second-guess our instincts." "What is it?" I asked. "Really?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Some things don't have names we should speak. Some things are older than language. What matters is knowing how to protect yourself, knowing the rules." "What rules?" "Never answer when it calls. Never acknowledge it directly. Never invite it. Never show it you're afraid. Even though you are. Don't run that road alone. Don't run anywhere alone after dark. Not for a while." He looked back at me. "And if you see it again, you turn around and walk away. Don't engage. Don't make eye contact. Just leave." I nodded, absorbing each instruction like it was scripture, because that's what it was, really. Survival wisdom passed down through generations, knowledge born from others who'd encountered something similar and lived to pass on the warning. The first gray light of dawn began seeping around the edges of the window. Samuel's posture relaxed slightly, though he didn't move from his position. "It won't stay much longer," he said. "Daylight pushes it back, weakens it. Where does it go?" He shrugged. "Wherever these things go, out into the empty places, back into the earth. I don't know, and I don't want to know." As the sun climbed higher, Samuel finally unlocked the door and swung it open. Fresh, cold morning air flooded the hogan, dispersing the smoke, bringing with it the familiar smell of sage and desert and frost. Everything outside looked normal, peaceful, as if nothing unusual had occurred at all. But my hands were still shaking. My whole body ached from tension and exhaustion, and when Samuel gestured for me to follow him outside, dread settled heavy in my stomach. "Come," he said. "We need to go back." "Back?" My voice cracked. "I can't. You need to see," Samuel insisted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You need to understand what followed you. Otherwise you'll always wonder, always doubt yourself." He was right, though I hated admitting it. Part of me wanted to dismiss last night as panic, exhaustion, imagination, but I knew better. Something had happened, something real and terrible, and pretending otherwise wouldn't protect me. We walked down the dirt road together, Samuel's eyes scanning the ground constantly. He moved slowly, deliberately, studying the earth like it held messages only he could read. The morning sun felt impossibly bright after the long darkness, making everything sharp and clear and painfully normal. When we reached the stretch of road near the old water tank, Samuel stopped. He knelt in the dirt, running his fingers along marks in the dust. "Here," he said quietly. I moved closer, looking down. My footprints were clear, scattered from my panicked run. But beside them, running parallel, were marks I hadn't noticed in the dark. Not footprints exactly, something else. Cloven prints, split down the middle, too narrow and precise to be from any deer or livestock I'd seen, and they matched my stride perfectly, step for step, never deviating. My stomach turned over. "What?" "Hooves," Samuel said simply. "It ran beside you, not behind, not in front, beside you, matching your pace exactly." I felt dizzy, lightheaded. The morning sun suddenly felt too hot, the air too thin. I'd been running alongside something that left hooves in the dust, something that could speak in my voice, something that could be in multiple places at once. Samuel stood, pulling a small pouch from his jacket pocket. He scattered ash over the strange prints, murmuring words I didn't understand. The ash settled into the marks, obscuring them, and somehow that felt important, necessary. "It was testing you," he said, his voice calm and factual. "Seeing how you'd react. If you'd stopped, if you'd turned to look at it directly, if you'd tried to communicate." He shook his head. "You did the right thing. You ran." I felt like a coward, I admitted. Courage isn't about fighting everything that scares you. Sometimes courage is knowing when to run, when to ask for help, when to admit something is beyond your understanding. Samuel looked at me seriously. "You're alive because you trusted your fear. That's wisdom, not cowardice." We stood there quietly, staring at those disturbing prints until the ash had fully settled. The desert around us was waking up, birds calling, a distant dog barking, the sound of a truck rumbling along a far road. Normal sounds, human sounds, life going on. "Can I ask you something?" I said hesitantly. Samuel nodded. "My footprints from last night. There were 2 sets, both from my shoes, running side by side." He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I saw those too." "How?" "Some things mirror us," he said carefully. "They copy what we are, how we move, what we sound like. It's how they get close, how they confuse us. Makes us doubt what we're seeing, makes us think we're losing our minds. That doubt is dangerous. It makes openings." I remembered staring down at those duplicate prints, the absolute terror of seeing my own footsteps running beside me. It was pretending to be me, in a way, or showing you what it could do, a demonstration of power. Samuel started walking back toward his hogan. "Either way, you're fortunate. Most people don't get warnings. Most people just disappear." My grandmother was waiting when we got back to her property. She stood outside her trailer with her arms crossed, her face set in that expression of knowing concern that grandmothers seem to master. She looked at me, then at Samuel, then back to me. "I dreamed about coyotes last night," she said without preamble, circling the house, watching the windows. "I'd been awake since 3 in the morning, burning cedar and praying." Relief washed through me so powerfully I nearly collapsed. She believed me without my having to explain. She understood. "We're moving closer to town," she continued, her voice firm. "I've been thinking about it for months anyway. This decides it. I'll call your father today." Samuel nodded his approval. "Good. That old road, it's not safe. Hasn't been safe for a long time. Too isolated, too far from help." They talked logistics while I stood there, exhausted and overwhelmed. The practical nature of their conversation was oddly comforting. Moving trucks, timing. Which cousin could help with heavy furniture, normal concerns, ordinary problems. A reminder that life went on, even after encountering something impossible. Within 2 weeks, my grandmother had relocated to a small house on the edge of Shiprock proper, near enough to neighbors that you could see their lights at night. I helped with the move, carrying boxes and furniture, grateful for the physical exhaustion that let me sleep without dreaming. I went back to school, threw myself into my classes, tried to rebuild the normal rhythm of college life. But something had changed fundamentally. I couldn't run at night anymore. Even on well-lit city streets with other people around, the moment dusk fell, I'd find myself hurrying home, looking over my shoulder, listening for footsteps that matched my own. My roommate asked if I was okay, if something had happened over break. I told him I'd had a close call with an aggressive coyote, which was true enough. He accepted the explanation and stopped asking questions. I graduated from Northern Arizona University 2 years later, moved to Flagstaff for work, tried to build a normal adult life. I got engaged, then married, had a daughter, bought a house, built a career, did all the things you're supposed to do. But I never ran at night. Not once. Not ever. And whenever I drove back to Shiprock to visit my grandmother, I took the long way around, avoiding that old road past Red Rock Wash entirely. Sometimes my wife would suggest the shorter route, pointing it out on the map, and I'd make excuses. Traffic patterns, road conditions, wanting to stop somewhere along the main highway. She eventually stopped suggesting it. On one visit several years after that February night, I saw Samuel at the trading post. He was older, grayer, moving more slowly, but his eyes were still sharp, still knowing. He saw me and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that needed no words. "Still careful?" he asked simply. "Always," I replied. "Good." He paused, studying me. "Your daughter, how old?" "4. "Teacher," he said seriously. "Not the details, not the stories, just the rules. Never run alone at night. Never answer voices in the dark. Never ignore fear." He looked at me intently. "Tradition isn't just songs and ceremonies. It's survival wisdom. Pass it on." I promised him I would. Now sometimes on clear nights when I'm standing outside my house in Flagstaff, I look east toward the reservation and remember that February evening. I remember the silence, the impossible footprints, the voice that stole my own. I remember the terror of running through darkness with something ancient pacing beside me. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes when the night is particularly still and I'm outside alone, I think I see a shape on the ridge behind our property. A coyote larger than normal, perfectly motionless. Watching. I never stare at it directly. I never acknowledge it. I simply turn around and go inside, locking the door behind me, grateful for the protection of walls and light and the sleeping family I've built. Because Samuel was right. Some things are older than we can understand, stranger than we can explain. They're out there in the empty places, patient and watching, waiting for moments of carelessness or loneliness or doubt. And the only defense we have is remembering the rules, following the wisdom passed down through generations, and teaching our children to respect the darkness without letting them know exactly what waits there. I'm alive because I ran that night, because I trusted my fear, because Samuel knew the old ways of protection. But I also know with absolute certainty that if I ever broke the rules, if I ran that road again after dark, if I answered when something calls my name, if I looked directly at what watches from the ridges, I wouldn't get another chance. Some gifts of mercy aren't offered twice. So I stay careful, I stay alert, and I teach my daughter that when something feels wrong, when fear touches the back of your neck for no obvious reason, you don't question it, you don't investigate, you simply leave. Because out there, beyond the safety of lights and company and protected spaces, old things still wait in the darkness, and they're always, always patient. I'm writing this down because the images won't stop playing in my head. Not to convince anyone of anything, just to get it out where I can see it as words instead of feelings that wake me at 3 in the morning. Last October, my younger brother Tyler and I decided to take a budget road trip through the Southwest. We rented a compact sedan, the cheapest one available, and planned our route from cheap motel to cheap motel. We kept a cooler in the back seat filled with sandwiches and water bottles, saving money wherever we could. The whole point was to put distance between us and our regular lives, our jobs, our inboxes that never stopped filling. We had spent 3 days near Moab, hiking and taking photos, before pointing the car south. We hit US 163 just as afternoon was turning to evening. The road stretched ahead of us, impossibly straight, with those massive red buttes rising on either side like ancient monuments. Tyler was 26, 3 years younger than me, and he had his feet up on the dashboard despite my protests. He was flipping through a worn atlas, the kind with actual paper pages, because his phone had died hours ago and he'd forgotten his charger at the last motel. The sun was setting behind the formations near the Utah-Arizona border, painting everything in shades of orange and crimson that looked almost artificial. I remember thinking how the rocks seemed to glow from within, holding on to the last rays of light. We passed a few other vehicles heading the opposite direction, but the southbound lane was mostly empty, just us and the endless asphalt and the gathering dusk. Around mile marker 13, we spotted that famous pullout. You've probably seen it in photographs, the one where the road cuts straight through the valley with the buttes framing the horizon. We pulled off without discussion, both of us knowing we wanted to see the sunset properly. We climbed out and stood there with our jackets zipped up against the cooling air, hands shoved deep in our pockets, watching the colors shift and darken. A small group of tourists was there too, a family with 2 kids who were chasing each other around their minivan. The father nodded at us and said something about the view being worth the stop. His wife was taking photos with a professional-looking camera, adjusting her lens to catch the last good light. They packed up their kids and drove off about 15 minutes before full dark, calling out a cheerful "have a good night" as they pulled away. Tyler and I were more stubborn. We wanted to see the stars come out. Wanted to catch that moment when the sky transitions from blue to black and the first pinpricks of light appear. We stood there in the growing darkness, watching the constellations emerge one by one. The temperature dropped fast once the sun was gone completely. The desert does that, scorching during the day, then cold enough to make you shiver once night falls. By the time we finally headed back to the car, it was fully dark. Not the kind of dark you get in a city or even in a suburb, but true darkness. The kind where your eyes keep trying to adjust and never quite manage it. The stars were brilliant overhead, so many of them that they looked like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. I fumbled with my keys, the metal cold against my fingers, and started the engine. The headlights cut into the night, showing us the empty road ahead. I eased forward slowly, planning to merge back onto the highway. We had maybe 60 miles to go before our next motel, and I was already thinking about a hot shower and a bed. That's when I felt it. A bump, small but definite, as the right rear tire rolled over something. It made a sound like a bottle cap or a piece of broken glass. The tire thumped once, twice. Then the handling went soft and loose. "Damn it," I said, gripping the steering wheel. The car pulled slightly to the right. "Flat?" Tyler asked, though he already knew the answer. I rolled us back into the pullout because there was nowhere else to go. The highway stretched empty in both directions, and the next pullout was miles away. We sat there for a moment, engine still running, both of us staring ahead at nothing. Neither of us wanted to get out, though neither of us would have admitted it then. We'd both changed tires before. It was one of those basic skills our father had insisted on teaching us, standing in our driveway on a Saturday afternoon, making us do it 3 times each until we could go through the process without thinking. This shouldn't have been a big deal. Just annoying. A delay in our plans. Maybe 20 minutes of work in the cold. I popped the trunk and we climbed out. The hazard lights started their rhythmic clicking, the amber glow pulsing across the asphalt. The trunk held the standard emergency kit, a scissor jack still in its plastic wrapper, a lug wrench that looked like it had never been used, a compact spare tire, one of those reflective warning triangles, and a wax-wrapped road flare that was probably older than our rental car. The night air hit my face, dry and sharp. Tyler pulled out the jack while I grabbed the lug wrench. We'd done this dance before. We knew the steps. There was something comforting about that, about having a routine to follow even in an unfamiliar place. I positioned myself by the rear tire and ran my hand along the pinch weld, feeling for the right spot to place the jack. The metal was cold enough to sting my fingertips. I found the groove and slid the jack saddle into place, making sure it was properly seated. Tyler worked on loosening the lug nuts, turning each one a quarter turn in a star pattern, just like we'd been taught. They resisted at first, then gave way with small grunts of effort from him. I looked around for something to use as a wheel chock. There wasn't much out there, just scrub brush and dust and darkness. I found a rock about the size of my fist and wedged it in front of one of the front tires. Not perfect, but it would do. Traffic was sparse. Every 10 minutes or so, a set of headlights would appear in the distance, growing slowly larger, then rushing past us with a whoosh of displaced air. Then nothing again, just the vast empty darkness and the clicking of our hazard lights. The silence between vehicles was total. No insect sounds, no bird calls, nothing. Just wind that came in gusts, carrying dust and that endless desert smell of sage and stone. I knelt by the jack and started cranking the handle. Up, down, up, down. The car began to lift slowly, the tire leaving the ground inch by inch. The motion was hypnotic, repetitive. Tyler stood nearby, the lug wrench in one hand, watching me work. He was quiet, which wasn't unusual, but there was something in his posture that seemed more alert than the situation required. That's when the smell arrived. It came on the wind, but it was completely wrong for the temperature. Metallic like a handful of hot pennies, mixed with something organic and damp, like hair after someone's been sweating under a hat all day. I paused mid-crank, my nose wrinkling. "You smell that?" I asked. Tyler nodded slowly. "Yeah, thought it was just me. Maybe a semis break somewhere down the road," I offered, though I didn't believe it even as I said it. The smell was too close, too immediate, and there hadn't been a truck in the past 10 minutes. "Maybe," Tyler said, but he didn't sound convinced either. I kept cranking. Up, down, up, down. The rhythm helped me push away the uneasiness creeping into my chest. This was just a flat tire. We'd be done in 15 minutes and back on the road. The smell would fade. It was probably nothing. Across the road from where we'd stopped, a livestock fence ran parallel to the highway. I could barely make it out in the darkness. Just a series of vertical posts connected by wire, stretching away in both directions. Beyond it was scrub brush and open desert, and beyond that the dark shapes of the rock formations we'd been admiring at sunset. They looked different now, heavier somehow, like sleeping giants. Our headlights pointed forward and slightly right, creating a cone of illumination that didn't reach very far, just enough to outline the nearest fence posts and throw weak shadows across the brush. Everything outside that narrow beam was invisible. I was focused on the jack, counting the cranks in my head, when Tyler stopped talking. We'd been discussing tomorrow's route, whether to take the scenic road through Canyon to Chelly, or push straight through to Flagstaff, but he'd gone silent mid-sentence. I glanced up and saw him staring past me, toward the fence line. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were tracking something I couldn't see, moving slowly from left to right. The lug wrench hung loose in his grip. "Tyler, what is it?" "Something's out there," he said quietly, "by the fence." I stopped cranking and turned to look, but I couldn't see anything. Just darkness and the dim outlines of posts. "What kind of something?" "I don't know, it's pacing." He said it like he was working through a problem. "I swear it's moving in time with your jack handle. When you pump, it steps. When you stop, it stops." "Come on," I said, forcing a laugh that came out wrong. "It's probably just..." "Try it," he interrupted. "Keep going. Watch." I turned back to the jack and cranked the handle. Up, down, and then I heard it. Faint but distinct. The sound of footsteps on gravel. Light and measured, coming from somewhere across the road. Click, click, matching my rhythm exactly. I froze. The steps stopped. My heart was suddenly loud in my ears. I made myself move the jack handle again. Slowly, up, down, the footsteps resumed. Click, click. "See?" Tyler's voice was tight. "It's keeping pace." I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, that we were both tired and spooked by the darkness and the isolation. But I could hear it too. Something was out there, hidden in the shadows beyond our headlights, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. The smell grew stronger. That hot metal scent, laced with something damp and wrong. I felt it coat the inside of my nose, settle in the back of my throat. "It's staying at the edge of the lights," Tyler said. "Look, right there where the beam stops. It doesn't want to come into the full light." He was right. I could sense movement in that border zone, that space between what we could see clearly and what was hidden in darkness. A subtle shifting, like something was testing the boundaries of our visibility. "Let's just get this done," I said, hearing the shake in my own voice. "Fast." I cranked harder, trying to speed up the process. The steps across the road accelerated to match. Tyler swore under his breath and knelt down, readying himself to pull the damaged tire free once the car was high enough. His hands were shaking slightly, but he kept his focus on the task. We got the wheel off, and I slid it under the rocker panel as a safety measure. Standard procedure in case the jack slipped. My father's voice in my head, Never trust a jack alone. Always have a backup. The spare was ready, the metal hub visible in the dim glow of our headlights. That's when the smell intensified so much I actually gagged. It rolled over us like a wave, thick and cloying, making my eyes water. And at the same moment, the car rocked. Not from our side. Not from anything we were doing. From the front. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. A small shift in the car's weight, like someone had leaned against the front bumper, just enough to make the chassis creak, to send a vibration through the frame that I felt in my hands where they rested on the quarter panel. "Did you touch the front?" I asked Tyler. Though I could see he was still kneeling by the rear wheel, the spare tire gripped in both hands. No, that wasn't me. We both stared at the front of the car. The headlights continued to shine into the empty night. Nothing visible. Nothing that made sense. "Hey," I said, louder than I needed to, my voice cracking slightly. "Hey, back off." I didn't know who I was talking to. Didn't know if anyone was even there to hear. But saying something felt necessary. Felt like I was establishing a boundary even if I had no way to enforce it. For a moment nothing happened. The desert wind gusted around us, cold and indifferent. Then I saw it. Something long and dark sliding under the front bumper. Low to the ground, almost flat against the asphalt. At first glance, I thought it was a trash bag that had blown across the road, or maybe a tumbleweed dragging itself along. But it moved with purpose. It moved deliberately. It slithered under the car toward the engine block, and I heard a sound that made my stomach clench. A slow drag across the oil pan. Metal on metal, not hard enough to punch through but firm enough to leave a mark. The scraping moved from front to back, deliberate and exploratory, like fingers reading braille. Then came a softer sound, almost musical, a ping near the crossmember, like someone had flicked a fingernail against the underside of the car. Tyler's face had gone pale in the headlight's backwash. "What the hell is under there?" "I don't know," I said, and I could hear my own breathing getting faster. "Get away from the side. Stand up." He rose quickly, still holding the spare tire like a shield. The car shifted again. That same small rock from the front. The jack held. Thank God. The jack held, but my hands were shaking as I gripped the quarter panel. The smell was overwhelming now. Not just hot metal anymore, but something else underneath it. Something organic and rotten, like meat left in the sun. My throat convulsed and I had to swallow hard to keep from being sick. "There's something under the car," Tyler said, stating the obvious because sometimes when you're scared, you need to say things out loud to make them real. I don't know what we need to do." I looked down the highway and saw salvation in the form of headlights. Far down the road, maybe a mile out, a single vehicle approaching from the south. Help, or at least witnesses, or at least someone else's headlights to add more illumination to this nightmare. Whatever was under the car seemed to notice too. The scraping stopped. The pressure against the front bumper released. And then I caught a glimpse of movement. Something pulling back, sliding away from the undercarriage, retreating toward the passenger side. "It's moving," Tyler said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's going to the right side, where they won't see it when they pass." He was right. The thing, whatever it was repositioning itself, staying hidden, staying in the blind spots where an approaching driver wouldn't catch it in their headlights. It was smart, or at least it was acting with intelligence, with calculation. I wanted to wave my arms at the approaching vehicle. Wanted to scream for help. But what would I say? What could I possibly explain? Two guys changing a tire on a dark road didn't look like an emergency from a distance. And I was terrified that if I did something to make the car slow down or stop, I might be putting someone else in danger. "We need light," I said. "More light. Now." Tyler was already moving, dropping the spare tire and lunging for the trunk. He grabbed the reflective triangle and the road flare, his hands fumbling with the wax wrapper. The paper tore in his shaking fingers. "Don't throw it at the car," I said quickly, suddenly terrified he might set our rental on fire in his panic. "I'm not going to throw it at the car," he snapped back, and I heard the fear in his voice matching my own. He got the wrapper off and struck the flare against its cap. It caught immediately with a harsh hiss, bathing us in angry red light. Chemical smoke streamed from the tip and Tyler's face looked demonic in the glow. Without hesitating, he jammed the flare through the bottom crossbar of the warning triangle, wedging it in place so the two pieces formed a single unit, a standing torch. "I'm going past it," he said. "Tyler, don't." But he was already moving, running forward with the burning triangle held out in front of him. He got about 10 feet ahead of our car, level with where the front bumper ended, and then he put his whole body behind the throw, not at the thing, not toward the fence. He threw it past where the creature had been, lobbing the flaming triangle into the scrub brush beyond the fence line. The road flare landed about 20 feet past the fence, still attached to the triangle, both of them tumbling end over end before settling into the brush. The triangle caught on something and stayed upright, creating exactly what Tyler had intended, a bright point of light on the far side of our unseen stalker. The effect was immediate and terrible. The creature was backlit. We couldn't see it directly, couldn't make out details with any clarity, but the light threw its shadow back toward us, and more importantly, the glow behind it showed us the outline of what had been hiding in that narrow band of darkness. The torso was wrong, too long, stretched like someone had grabbed a human body at both ends and pulled. The legs bent backward at the knee, then forward again, then backward once more. Too many joints moving in ways that made my brain ache trying to process the mechanics. Arms that reached too far, hanging past where they should have ended, with fingers or something like fingers that seemed to multiply as I watched. But it was the head that made me stop breathing. Proportioned all wrong, too wide, set at an angle that suggested the neck could rotate further than it should. The thing flinched. Not dramatically. Not like in a movie where the monster rears up and roars. It flinched the way any animal flinches when sudden bright light hits it unexpectedly fast, automatic, driven by instinct. A whole body shudder that traveled from its misshapen head down through that too long torso. And then it moved. Odd the way it moved. It peeled away from our car in a motion that seemed to defy physics. A low, loping run that covered distance impossibly fast, like watching footage in fast forward. It flowed over the uneven ground, navigating brush and rocks without breaking stride, its backward-bending legs propelling it forward in bounds that ate up yards with each stride. It dropped behind a hump of scrub brush and kept going, heading south parallel to the highway, away from the light, away from us. Within seconds, it had moved far enough that the flare's glow couldn't reach it anymore, and it vanished into the vast darkness of the desert. The smell faded with it, not immediately, but gradually, like smoke clearing from a room when you open a window. The hot metal scent thinned, then disappeared entirely, leaving only the clean desert smell of sage and dust. The approaching vehicle passed us without slowing. A pickup truck, moving at highway speed, its driver probably never even noticing two guys standing frozen by a rental car with its hazards on. Just another breakdown on a lonely road. Nothing to see. Nothing worth stopping for. I realized I was gripping the car's quarter panel so hard my fingers had gone numb. I forced them to release, flexing them to get blood flowing again. My whole body felt like it had been clenched into a fist. "Did you see?" Tyler started. "Yeah. The way it... yeah." We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving, both of us staring at the spot where the thing had disappeared. The road flare continued to burn in the distance, a single point of angry red light that seemed suddenly very far away and very alone. "We need to finish," I said finally. "We need to finish and get out of here." Tyler nodded, swallowing hard. He grabbed the spare tire from where he'd dropped it and rolled it toward the hub. His hands were shaking so badly that I had to help him guide it onto the studs. We worked together, not talking, our movements quick and jerky with adrenaline. He threaded the lug nuts on with his fingers, screwing them down as far as they would go, then grabbed the wrench. He hit each one in the star pattern we'd been taught, the wrench clicking and catching with each pull. My boot was under the jack handle, ready to lower the car the moment he was done. "Tighter," I said, hearing the tremor in my voice. "They're tight. Make them tighter." He didn't argue. He went around again, leaning into the wrench with more force, making sure each nut was seated as firmly as possible. I didn't want to break down again. Not here, not anywhere within 100 miles of here. When he nodded, I lowered the jack slowly, watching to make sure the spare settled properly, that nothing slipped or shifted. The car came down evenly, and the donut compressed under the weight but held firm. We pulled the jack free and tossed it into the trunk, threw the damaged tire in after it, not bothering to secure anything properly. The lug wrench went in next, clattering against the metal. I slammed the trunk lid harder than necessary, the sound echoing across the empty desert. We climbed into the car. I started the engine. It caught immediately, the dashboard lights glowing warm and familiar and normal. Tyler fastened his seatbelt with shaking hands and I put the car in gear. I pulled out onto the highway carefully, not tearing away in a panic but not dawdling either. The donut wasn't rated for high speed, and the last thing we needed was to blow it out trying to escape. As we accelerated away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road flare was still burning, a distant red point getting smaller and smaller. It would burn for another 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, and then it would go out, and that stretch of desert would be dark again. We passed mile marker 14, then 15. The rock formations that had looked so beautiful at sunset now felt oppressive, looming over us from both sides of the highway. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, on the painted lines that seemed like the only solid, trustworthy things in the world. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 miles. The only sounds in the car were the hum of the engine, the rhythmic thump of the donut tire against asphalt, and our breathing gradually slowing back to normal. The heater was on full blast, but I felt cold from the inside out. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Around mile marker 25, Tyler finally broke the silence. "We can't tell anyone about this." "I know. They'll think we're crazy." "I know." Another few miles of silence. The highway stretched ahead, empty and dark. No other vehicles in sight. Just us and the road and the desert that suddenly felt far less empty than it had before. "What was it?" Tyler asked. "I don't know. But you saw." "I saw something. I don't know what it was." I didn't want to give it a name. Didn't want to categorize it, or define it, or make it more real than it already was. If I started down that path, started trying to explain what we'd seen, I'd have to confront the impossibility of it, the wrongness of those proportions, those movements, that intelligence. "The way it moved when you threw the light," I said. "It reacted. It understood what you were doing." Tyler nodded in the darkness. "It was smart. It knew where to hide, knew how to stay out of sight." Yeah. The implications of that were almost worse than the creature itself. This wasn't some mindless animal acting on instinct. It had been strategic, patient. It had waited in the exact spot where our headlights wouldn't reach it, where passing vehicles wouldn't spot it. It had matched its movements to the rhythm of our work, timing itself to our activities. And when Tyler had thrown the light behind it, eliminating its cover, it had retreated immediately rather than pressing an attack. It had been hunting us, or stalking us, or studying us. And we'd gotten lucky with that one clever throw. "My hands hurt," Tyler said suddenly. I glanced over and saw him flexing his fingers, opening and closing them slowly. "What happened?" "The lug wrench slipped. When I was loosening the nuts, scraped my knuckles on the ground." "Let me see." I turned on the interior light. His right hand was bleeding from 3 knuckles. Shallow scrapes but still raw and angry looking. "We'll clean that when we stop." "Where are we stopping?" Good question. Our plan had been to push through to a cheap motel somewhere around Kayenta, but that was still 30 miles away. I looked at the gas gauge, 3/4 full. The donut was holding steady. "Kayenta," I said. "First place with lights." "Okay." He turned off the interior light, and we drove in darkness again. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something following us, but there was only empty road stretching behind us, fading into the darkness. At mile marker 38, we passed another vehicle heading north. A sedan, maybe a family heading home from vacation. Normal people living a normal night. I felt a weird disconnect, like we'd slipped into a different reality for an hour and now we were trying to pretend we belonged back in the regular world. "We should check the car," Tyler said. "When we stop, look at where it was dragging under the front."
Yeah.
I didn't want to. Didn't want to see whatever evidence that thing had left behind. But I knew we had to know if it was real, if we'd actually experienced what we thought we'd experienced. Signs started appearing for Kayenta. 20 miles. 15. The numbers counting down felt like a countdown to safety. When we finally saw lights on the horizon, the glow of gas stations and fast food restaurants and that universal orange haze that comes from streetlights and parking lots, I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. I pulled off at the first exit and into the parking lot of a chain hotel. It wasn't fancy, just a 3-story rectangle with exterior doors and a small lobby. But it was blazingly lit, with floodlights in the parking lot that turned night into something approaching day. There were other cars parked in various spots, normal vehicles belonging to normal people who'd had normal evenings. I pulled into a space directly under one of the brightest lamps I could find, put the car in park, turned off the engine. Neither of us moved to get out. "We're okay," Tyler said. It sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Yeah, we made it."
Yeah.
We sat there for another minute, the parking lot lights harsh and wonderful through the windshield. Then I unlocked the doors and we climbed out. The lobby was small but clean, with that generic hotel smell of industrial cleaner and carpet shampoo. A young man behind the counter looked up from his computer as we entered, gave us a professional smile. "Evening. Checking in?" "Yeah," I said. "2 beds if you have it." "Let me see what's available." He clicked through screens while we stood there, probably looking as rattled as we felt. If he noticed, he didn't comment, just went through the standard routine. ID, credit card, how many keys, ice machine is down the hall, breakfast starts at 6. We took the keys and went back out to get our bags. Tyler stopped by the front bumper of the car and knelt down. "Come look at this." I joined him, and we both crouched in the harsh glare of the parking lot lights. The area under the front license plate bracket showed fresh damage, 5 or 6 straight grooves, running parallel to each other, evenly spaced, deep enough that I could catch my fingernail in them. The metal was scored cleanly, the paint scraped away in neat lines. "What could do that?" Tyler asked. I had no answer. The marks were too regular to be from road debris, too precise to be from any tool I knew. They looked almost like claw marks, except that made no sense because claws would have left curved gouges, not these straight parallel lines. We moved around to the side of the car and I used my phone's flashlight to look up at the oil pan. There was a shallow scrape running lengthwise along the bottom, shallower than the marks on the front but just as clean. No rough edges, no tearing of the metal, just a smooth line where something had dragged across it. "We need to tell the rental company," Tyler said. "We need to tell them about a flat tire," I corrected. "That's all. We had a flat. We changed it. Everything else is normal." "But, Tyler," I stood up, my knees cracking. "What are we going to say? Something crawled under the car and left marks? They'll charge us for the damage, and that's it. There's no story we can tell that they'll believe, and no story that would help us even if they did." He stared at the gouges under the plate bracket for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." We grabbed our bags from the trunk and headed to our room. It was on the 2nd floor, accessed by an exterior staircase. The room was standard, 2 double beds, a TV mounted on the wall, a bathroom the size of a closet, normal, safe, ordinary. I turned on every light, including the one in the bathroom. Tyler didn't question it. He dropped his bag on the bed nearest the window and immediately went to the sink. I dug through our shared first aid kit and found antibacterial ointment and Band-Aids. "Hold still," I said, and washed the scrapes on his knuckles under the faucet. The water ran pink for a few seconds, then clear. The damage wasn't bad, shallow scrapes that would heal in a few days, but I cleaned them carefully anyway, using more ointment than necessary, covering them with 3 Band-Aids even though 2 would have been enough. The routine was comforting. Medical care, basic first aid, something normal and human, and explainable. Tyler sat on his bed still wearing his jacket, his feet up on the covers. I sat on mine the same way. The TV remote was between us, but neither of us reached for it. The room's heater kicked on with a rattle, and I was grateful for the noise, for something to fill the silence. "That smell," Tyler said after a while. "The hot metal smell." "Yeah. I've never smelled anything like that." "Me either. And the way it moved. The joints. That wasn't." He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "I know. We sound crazy even talking about it." "I know." We sat there for a while longer, not talking, just existing in a well-lit room with a deadbolt on the door and other people in nearby rooms living their lives. Eventually, Tyler got up and took a shower. I could hear the water running, hear him moving around in the tiny bathroom. Normal sounds. Human sounds. When he came out, I took my turn. The water was almost too hot, but I stood under it anyway. letting it beat against my neck and shoulders, washing away the desert dust and the smell of fierce sweat, and hopefully some of the memory of what we'd seen. But when I closed my eyes, I could still see that silhouette thrown by the road flare, the impossible proportions, the wrong angles, the way it had moved with such fluid speed. I got out and dried off, dressed in clean clothes, tried to feel normal. Tyler was lying on top of his covers, staring at the ceiling. "You going to sleep?" he asked. "I'll try." "Yeah, me too." But neither of us did. I lay there in my bed listening to the sounds of the hotel. Footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere, the ice machine running, traffic on the highway. Tyler tossed and turned in his bed, his breathing never settling into the deep rhythm of sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up and went downstairs. The lobby was empty except for the night clerk, a different person than the one who checked us in. I nodded at him and went to stand by the window that looked out over the parking lot. Our rental car sat under its lamp, looking small and ordinary. The damage we'd found was invisible from this distance, just a compact sedan with a donut tire on the back, parked among a dozen other vehicles that all had their own stories, their own destinations. I stood there for over an hour, watching the parking lot, watching the road beyond it, watching the darkness at the edge of the lights, that border zone where visibility ends and imagination begins. Nothing moved except an occasional car on the highway, headlights cutting through the night. When dawn started to lighten the eastern sky, I finally went back upstairs. Tyler was sitting up in bed, his phone in his hands. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked. "No." "Same." We packed up our things in silence, neither of us having gotten any real rest. But the sun was up, and daylight made the world feel manageable again, even if the memory of the previous night remained sharp and vivid. We checked out at 8 and found a hotel restaurant that served breakfast. The coffee was weak but hot, and I drank 3 cups. Tyler ordered more food than he could finish, pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate without eating much. We were both exhausted, running on adrenaline that had worn off hours ago. A local man in his 60s, wearing a worn work jacket and dusty boots, was pouring himself coffee at the same time we were filling our cups. He ended up sitting at the table next to ours, and I saw him glance over at us a few times while he ate. Finally, he leaned slightly in our direction. "You boys look like you had a rough night." Tyler and I exchanged glances. There was something in the man's tone, not curiosity exactly, but a kind of knowing recognition, like he'd seen that look before. "Had a flat tire," I said carefully, "on near mile marker 13. The man's expression changed, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes. "What time was this?" "After dark. Maybe 8:30. He nodded slowly, took a sip of his coffee. "You boys shouldn't stop on that road after dark." "We didn't have much choice," Tyler said. "The tire went flat." "I understand that. But that road," he paused, seemed to be choosing his words. "The people who've lived here a long time, we don't stop on that stretch after sundown. Not if we can help it." "Why not?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The man met my eyes. "There are things out there that don't like to be seen. Things that follow the old paths before the highway was ever built. Things that hunt at night." He said it simply, matter-of-factly. Not trying to scare us. Not building it up into a ghost story. Just stating information the same way he might mention that rain was coming, or that the nearest gas station was closed on Sundays. "What kind of things?" Tyler asked. The man took another sip of coffee. "My people would call them skinwalkers. Your people might call them something else, or might not call them anything. Doesn't matter what name you use. What matters is they're out there, and they're patient, and they're smart enough to use the dark. We saw something," I said quietly, when we were changing the tire. "I expect you did. You're both still here, though, so you must have done something right." "My brother threw a flare past it," I said. "Put light behind it instead of at it." The man's eyebrows rose slightly, and for the first time, he looked genuinely impressed. "That's clever. Most people try to shine light at what's scaring them, but that just helps it stay in the dark spots. You lit up the area behind it, took away its cover. It left marks on the car," Tyler said, "under the front, like someone scratched it. I don't doubt it. They like to mark things, Territorial behavior, maybe. Or maybe just letting you know they were there, that they could have done worse. He finished his coffee and stood up. You boys want some advice? Yes, we both said together. If you're staying in this area, don't stop on lonely roads after dark. If you have to stop, get done fast and get moving again. And if something approaches you, don't try to fight it, and don't try to run from it. Do what you did. Use light smartly, take away its advantages, and get yourself somewhere populated. He picked up his hat from the table, and maybe say a prayer to God if you're the praying type. Couldn't hurt. Thank you, I said. He nodded and headed toward the exit, then paused and looked back. One more thing. Don't go looking for it again. Don't go back to that spot trying to get proof or photographs or whatever. It let you go last night. Don't press your luck. Then he was gone, leaving us alone with our cold eggs and 2 strong coffee. We sat there for a while, not talking. Other guests came and went, filling their plates, chatting about their plans for the day. Normal people doing normal things. We didn't feel normal anymore. We need to return the car, Tyler said finally. Yeah. We drove west on US 160, through Tuba City, and then on toward Flagstaff. The morning was bright and clear, the rock formations beautiful again in daylight. But I kept checking the rearview mirror, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The rental return was at a small office near the Flagstaff airport. We pulled in just before noon. A young agent came out to inspect the car, clipboard in hand. She walked around it slowly, making notes, then crouched by the front bumper. What happened here, she asked, pointing at the gouges under the plate bracket. Don't know, I said. Found it this morning. You didn't notice this damage when you picked up the car? No. We had a flat tire last night, changed it in the dark. Must have happened then. She took photos with her phone, then looked at us with the kind of expression that said she didn't quite believe us but couldn't prove otherwise. This is going to be added to your bill. Front fascia damage. How much? Probably $200-300. I'll have to get an estimate. We signed the paperwork, and she ran my credit card for an additional $275. It hurt, but not as much as spending another night anywhere near mile marker 13 would have hurt. She printed out our receipt and handed it over. You boys have a safe trip home. We took our bags and caught a shuttle to the airport. Sat in the terminal drinking more coffee while we waited for our flights. Mine to Seattle, his to Denver. Different cities, different lives to return to. Are we going to talk about this? Tyler asked. Ever? I don't know. Probably not.
Good.
But we both knew we'd never forget it. That we'd replay those moments for the rest of our lives. The sound of synchronized footsteps in the darkness. The smell of hot metal on cold air. The impossible silhouette thrown by the road flare. And the sick feeling of being hunted by something that understood tactics and timing. When his flight was called, he stood and grabbed his bag. Hey. Yeah? Thanks for not panicking back there. For keeping it together. You too, I said. That throw with the flare was smart. Or lucky. Let's say both. He nodded and headed toward his gate. I watched him disappear into the crowd of travelers. All of them moving through their ordinary days, unaware of what waited in the darkness beyond the reach of headlights. I'm writing this down months later, trying to capture what happened before the memory fades or changes shape the way memories do. The credit card charge is real. The receipt from the rental company is in my files. The scars on Tyler's knuckles are faded but still visible if you look closely. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night on an empty road, I find myself watching the edges of my headlights. Watching that narrow border between what I can see and what stays hidden in the dark. Listening for footsteps that match my rhythm. Smelling the air for hot metal that shouldn't be there. I can't prove what we saw. Can't explain it in a way that makes sense. Maybe it was something mundane that fear and darkness transformed into a nightmare. Maybe exhaustion and isolation created a shared delusion. Maybe the rational explanations are all true and we simply got spooked by a coyote in some unfortunate timing. But I don't believe that. And neither does Tyler. Though we don't talk about it. What I believe is what that man told us over breakfast in Kayenta. There are things that use the dark. Things that are patient and smart and territorial. Things that have been out there far longer than we have, following paths that existed before highways and headlights and GPS. And I believe his advice. Don't stop on lonely roads after dark unless you have no choice. If you must stop, work fast and get moving. Use light smartly, not to attack, but to eliminate cover. And if you're fortunate enough to get away, don't go back. So that's what happened at mile marker 13. That's what I saw. What we both saw. On a cold night last October. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just putting it down so I can maybe, eventually stop replaying it every time I close my eyes. Keep moving. That's the rule we follow now. Keep moving. And don't stop after dark on roads where the distance between travelers is measured in miles, and the only light comes from your own headlights. Keep moving, because something out there is patient enough to wait at the edges of that light. Something that understands how to use the dark. We got lucky once. I don't intend to test that luck again. The crackle of the radio cut through the stillness of the autumn morning, startling me from my thoughts. I'd been staring out the window of the ranger station, watching golden leaves drift lazily to the ground, when the voice of dispatch broke the silence. Ranger Finch, come in. We've got a situation. I grabbed the radio, my fingers brushing against the worn plastic. Finch here. What's the problem? We've received a report from a hiker. Says he stumbled across some remains out near Minaret Creek, about 2 miles off the main trail. Doesn't sound like your typical animal carcass. Can you check it out? A knot formed in my stomach. In my 8 years as a search and rescue officer with the U.S. Forest Service, I'd seen my fair share of grim discoveries, but something about this call felt different. Copy that. I'm on my way. I gathered my gear, methodically checking each item. Flashlight, first aid kit, map, compass. My hand hesitated over my service pistol. Regulations discouraged carrying firearms on routine calls, but a nagging feeling made me reconsider. After a moment's deliberation, I left it behind. Whatever was out there, I told myself, couldn't be worse than what I'd already encountered in these woods. As I stepped outside, the crisp air of Devil's Postpile National Monument filled my lungs. The massive basalt columns loomed in the distance, their geometric perfection a stark contrast to the wild tangle of the surrounding forest. I'd grown up in small towns, raised on stories of the wilderness and its secrets, but even after nearly a decade patrolling these parts, the monument never failed to inspire a sense of awe and unease. The drive to the trailhead was quiet. Too quiet. Usually the forest buzzed with life. Birds calling, small animals scurrying through the underbrush. Today an eerie silence blanketed the woods. I tried to shake off the growing sense of dread, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. As I parked and shouldered my pack, the sun was already dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. I checked my watch, 4:37 p.m. If I moved quickly, I could make it to the site and back before full dark. The trail was familiar, but today it felt different. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf set my nerves on edge. About a mile in, I noticed something odd, or rather the lack of something. No tracks, no scat, no signs of the usual wildlife that called these woods home. Just as I was about to radio in for a more precise location, I caught a whiff of something that made my stomach turn. A sickly sweet odor, undercut with the unmistakable copper tang of blood. I'd smelled death before, but this was different. Wrong, somehow. Following the scent, I pushed through a thick tangle of undergrowth, and there, half hidden beneath a carpet of fallen leaves, was what remained of a human body. My training kicked in, momentarily overriding the horror that threatened to overwhelm me. Male, I noted clinically. Mid-30s maybe. But beyond that, details were hard to discern. The body, what was left of it, was a mess of torn flesh and shattered bone. This was no ordinary animal attack. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. Long, deep gashes ran the length of the torso, as if something had taken its time, savoring the kill. I knelt to examine the ground around the body, and my blood ran cold. There, pressed into the soft earth, was a print unlike anything I'd ever seen. Too large for a wolf or mountain lion, with elongated claws that left deep furrows in the soil. Whatever had done this was big, and if I was reading the signs correctly, it wasn't far away. As I stood to radio for backup, A twig snapped somewhere in the deepening gloom of the forest. I froze, straining my ears. Another snap, closer this time. And then, just at the edge of my vision, something moved. It was massive, its form seeming to blend with the shadows of the trees. For a moment I could have sworn I saw eyes gleaming in the darkness, intelligent, predatory, and fixed directly on me. My heart pounding, I slowly reached for my radio, keeping my eyes locked on the spot where I'd seen movement. But as I lifted the device to my mouth, my fingers trembling, I realized with growing horror that all I heard was static. I was alone in the gathering darkness, with something watching, waiting, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that my night was just beginning. As the realization of my isolation sank in, a primal fear gripped me. The forest, once a familiar sanctuary, now felt like a closing trap. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. Panicking wouldn't help me survive whatever was out there. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the spot where I'd seen movement. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe, playing tricks on my vision. Was that a branch swaying in the wind, or the outline of some monstrous form? My foot caught on a root, nearly sending me sprawling. I caught myself, but the momentary lapse in concentration was all it took. When I looked up, the forest had changed. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to orient myself, but fear had taken over. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the forest, not with the clumsy desperation of my flight, but with a deliberate predatory grace. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder. In the fading light, the trees all looked the same, any sense of direction lost in the chaos of my flight. I burst into a small clearing, momentarily relieved by the open space. That's when I saw it. At the far edge of the clearing stood a figure that defied description. In the twilight, it was little more than a silhouette, but its wrongness was immediately apparent. It stood on 4 legs, its body low to the ground like some great cat. But its proportions were all wrong, too large, too angular. Its head perched on a thick corded neck swiveled to face me. In the gathering gloom, I caught a glimpse of eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence. For a moment we stood frozen, hunter and prey locked in a primal standoff. Then it moved. It crossed the clearing in 3 impossible bounds, covering ground faster than anything I'd ever seen. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as massive claws swept through the space where I'd been standing. I scrambled to my feet, my hand closing around a fallen branch. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. The creature circled me, its movements fluid and purposeful. In the dim light, I could make out more details of its bizarre anatomy, the way its skin seemed to shift and blend with the forest around it, the unnatural angles of its joints. It lunged again, and I swung the branch with all my might. There was a satisfying crack as wood met flesh, but my victory was short-lived. The branch shattered, leaving me defenseless as the creature reared back for another attack. I turned to run, but my foot caught in a tangle of roots. I went down hard, the air driven from my lungs. As I gasped for breath, I rolled onto my back, expecting to see the monster looming over me. Instead, I found myself alone in the clearing. The creature had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself to my feet. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential attack. I had to get out of these woods, to find help and warn others about what was out there. But as I looked around the unfamiliar clearing, a chilling realization set in. In my blind panic, I had run deeper into the wilderness, away from the trail and any hope of easy rescue. The sun had set, leaving me in near total darkness. My flashlight, along with most of my gear, had been lost in my frantic flight. I was lost, alone, and being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. And the long night was just beginning. The darkness of the forest pressed in around me, a living thing that seemed to breathe with malevolent intent. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I moved cautiously, straining my eyes to make out shapes in the gloom. My training kicked in, forcing me to take stock of my situation. I had no light, no weapon, and no clear idea of my location. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and my torn shirt offered little protection against the chill. Worst of all, something was out there, something that defied explanation and seemed intent on making me its prey. I needed to find shelter, to regroup and come up with a plan. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I spotted a rocky outcropping a short distance away. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide some cover in a defensible position. As I made my way towards the rocks, a sound stopped me in my tracks. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of my heart, but it grew clearer, sending ice through my veins. Whispers. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of voices just on the edge of comprehension. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, hungry, eager, filled with a terrible anticipation. I broke into a run, scrambling up the rocky slope. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. As I reached the top of the outcropping, I pressed my back against a large boulder, trying to control my ragged breathing. The voices faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, remained. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think rationally. I needed a fire for warmth and to keep predators at bay. I needed to find water, and most importantly, I needed to figure out where I was and how to get back to civilization. As I opened my eyes, movement in the forest below caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on my overtaxed mind. But as I watched, the darkness itself seemed to shift and flow, coalescing into vaguely humanoid shapes that drifted between the trees. I blinked hard, convinced I was hallucinating. When I looked again, the shapes were gone, but a new sound had replaced the whispers, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath me. The rational part of my mind insisted that there had to be a logical explanation. Exhaustion, fear, and the trauma of what I'd witnessed were clearly affecting my perceptions. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew that I had stumbled into something beyond the realm of normal explanation. As the night wore on, I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, never fully losing awareness of my surroundings. Each time I opened my eyes, the forest seemed different, trees where there had been none before, paths that twisted in impossible ways, and always, at the edge of my vision, those half-glimpsed shapes, watching and waiting. By the time the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I was shivering uncontrollably, as much from fear as from the cold. I had survived the night, but I knew with grim certainty that my ordeal was far from over. As I stood on shaky legs preparing to leave my meager shelter, a sound from the forest below froze me in place. It was a howl, but unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Part animal, part human, and filled with an otherworldly hunger that made my blood run cold. Whatever was out there, it was on the move, and it was coming for me. The howl galvanized me into action. Survival instinct overrode fear, and I found myself moving before I had consciously decided to do so. I scrambled down the rocky outcropping, my muscles protesting after hours of tense immobility. As my feet hit the forest floor, another howl split the air. Closer this time. I picked a direction at random and ran, my only goal to put as much distance between myself and that sound as possible. The pre-dawn forest was a maze of shadows and half-light. Branches clawed at my face and arms as I crashed through the underbrush. My lungs burned, and each breath felt like inhaling fire. But still I ran, driven by the primal fear of becoming prey. Behind me, I could hear movement, the snap of branches, the rustle of leaves. Whatever was chasing me wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. It was gaining ground, and fast. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing I had seen the night before was there, but in the gray light of dawn, its true form was revealed in all its horrifying glory. It moved on 4 legs, its body low to the ground like some monstrous big cat, but its skin was a patchwork of fur, scales, and what looked disturbingly like bark, constantly shifting and changing to blend with its surroundings. Its head was elongated, somewhere between a wolf's muzzle and a reptile's snout, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. But it was the eyes that truly chilled me to my core. They gleamed with an intelligence that was decidedly unanimal, filled with a malevolent hunger that I knew, with bone-deep certainty, could never be satisfied. The creature let out another of those otherworldly howls, and to my horror, it was answered by similar cries from the forest around us. There was more than one of these things, and they were coordinating, trying to cut off my escape. I veered sharply to the left, hoping to throw off their pursuit. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, tumbling down a steep embankment. Pain exploded through my body as I rolled, unable to stop my descent. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and battered. As I struggled to my feet, I realized I had fallen into a dry creek bed. The high banks on either side created a natural channel, a potential path out of this nightmare, but also a perfect trap if the creatures caught up to me. There was no time to weigh my options. I could hear them coming, their howls growing closer by the second. I took off down the creek bed, my feet slipping on loose stones and debris. The chase seemed to go on forever, my world narrowing to the pounding of my heart and the burning in my muscles. I was running on pure adrenaline now, each step a miracle of will over exhaustion. Just as I felt my strength beginning to fail, the creek bed widened, opening into a small clearing. In the center stood the ruins of an old cabin, its walls sagging and roof long since collapsed. It wasn't much, but it was the only shelter in sight. I made a final desperate sprint for the cabin, practically falling through the doorway as I heard the creatures burst into the clearing behind me. I slammed the rotting door shut, bracing it with my body as howls of frustration filled the air outside. As I fought to catch my breath, my eyes darted around the cabin's interior, looking for anything I could use as a weapon or to barricade the door. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in crude drawings and symbols, some carved directly into the wood, others painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. They depicted scenes of violence and transformation, humans twisting into bestial shapes, forests coming alive with malevolent intent. And there, scratched into the floorboards at my feet, was a message that made my heart stop. They are the forest and the forest is them. Run or become. As the creatures outside began to circle the cabin, their claws scraping against the wooden walls, I realized with growing horror that I had stumbled into something far older and far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined, and my chances of escaping with my humanity intact were growing slimmer by the second. The cabin creaked and groaned around me, its decrepit walls the only barrier between me and the horrors outside. I could hear them circling, their claws scraping against the wood, testing for weaknesses. Every few moments one would let out a bone-chilling howl, answered by others in the distance. They were calling for reinforcements. I knew I couldn't stay here long, but for the moment I had a chance to catch my breath and try to make sense of what was happening. My eyes were drawn back to the crude drawings on the walls. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the roof, I could make out more details. The images told a story, a dark history of these woods that sent shivers down my spine. They showed early settlers encountering something in the forest, something that changed them. Human figures twisted and warped, merging with trees and animals to become monstrous hybrids. And always, watching over these scenes of transformation, was a larger figure, a presence that seemed to embody the forest itself. As I studied the drawings, pieces started to fall into place. Old legends I'd dismissed as campfire stories suddenly took on new, terrifying significance. The locals had always said these woods were different, that they had a will of their own. I'd laughed it off as superstition. Now, faced with the evidence of my own eyes and the horrors outside, I wasn't laughing anymore. A particularly loud howl snapped me back to my immediate predicament. I needed a plan, a way out of this death trap. I scanned the cabin's interior, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. In one corner, half buried under rotting floorboards, I spotted the rusted blade of an old axe. As I moved to retrieve it, my foot caught on something. I looked down to see a trapdoor, its outline barely visible beneath years of dirt and debris. With trembling hands, I brushed away the grime, revealing a heavy iron ring. The creatures outside were getting more agitated, their howls taking on a frenzied quality. I knew I was out of time. Whatever was down there couldn't be worse than what waited for me up here. I heaved the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. Without hesitation, I grabbed the axe and plunged into the unknown, pulling the trapdoor shut behind me. The darkness was absolute, the air thick with the musty smell of long undisturbed earth. I felt my way down the stairs, every creak and groan sending my heart racing. Above, I could hear the creatures' frustration as they lost my scent. At the bottom of the stairs, my outstretched hands met cold stone. I was in some kind of underground chamber. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I began to make out shapes. Shelves lined with jars, tables covered in strange instruments, and at the center of it all, a large stone slab carved with intricate symbols. This place was old, far older than the cabin above. It had the feel of a sanctuary, a place of power and secrets, but it was also a tomb. In one corner, slumped against the wall, was a skeleton clad in the tattered remains of what might have once been a park ranger's uniform. Clutched in its bony hands was a leather-bound journal. With shaking fingers, I pried it free and opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was frantic, barely legible. May 17, 1986. They're coming. I can hear them in the woods, in my head. The forest is alive, and it's angry. We woke something. Something old. It's changing everything. Turning the animals, the trees, even people. This place is the key. The symbols, the rituals, they can control it. Maybe even stop it. But I'm out of time. To whoever finds this, don't let them take you. Don't let the forest in. And whatever you do, don't... The entry ended abruptly, a long scrawl of ink trailing off the page. I flipped through the rest of the journal, my mind reeling. It was filled with observations, theories, and rituals. The desperate work of someone trying to understand and combat what was happening in these woods. As I read, a plan began to form in my mind. If this place truly held power over the forest and its creatures, maybe I could use it to escape. But as I turned to examine the stone slab more closely, a sound from above made my blood run cold. The trapdoor was opening. They had found me. And as heavy footsteps began to descend the stairs, I realized that my time for study and planning had run out. Whatever I was going to do, I had to do it now. The true test of survival was about to begin. Time seemed to slow as I heard the heavy footsteps descending the stairs. My mind raced, trying to process everything I had learned and formulate a plan. The journal had mentioned rituals, symbols that could control or maybe even stop whatever force was at work in these woods. But I had no idea how to perform them, and certainly no time to learn. I gripped the rusted axe tightly, backing away from the stairs. The chamber wasn't large, but the gloom provided some cover. Maybe if I could surprise whatever was coming down those steps, I'd have a chance. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and a figure emerged from the darkness. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't one of the monstrous creatures I'd seen in the forest. It was a man, or at least it had been once. He stood unnaturally tall, his limbs elongated, and joints bent at impossible angles. His skin had a rough bark-like texture, and in places I could see leaves and small branches sprouting from his flesh. But it was his face that truly chilled me to the core. It was a twisted amalgamation of human and plant, his eyes sunken and glowing with an otherworldly light. When he spoke, his voice was a rasp of rustling leaves and creaking wood. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, taking a step towards me. "The forest has claimed this place. It will claim you too." I raised the axe, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay back. I don't want to hurt you." A sound like branches snapping in a storm emanated from his throat. A laugh, I realized with horror. "Hurt me? You can't hurt me. I am the forest, and the forest is me. Just as you will be, soon enough." He lunged forward with inhuman speed. I swung the axe in desperation, feeling it connect with a sickening thud. But where I expected blood, a shower of leaves and splinters erupted from the wound. The creature that had once been a man didn't even flinch. I scrambled backwards, my back hitting the stone slab at the center of the room. As my hand brushed against the carved symbols, I felt a jolt of energy course through me. The creature hesitated, its glowing eyes fixed on the slab. In that moment of respite, a crazy idea formed in my mind. I couldn't fight this thing, couldn't outrun it. But maybe, just maybe, I could use this place of power against it. I began tracing the symbols on the slab, my fingers following the grooves carved into the stone. I had no idea what I was doing, acting purely on instinct and desperate hope. But as I traced each symbol, I felt the air in the chamber grow thick with an unseen energy. The creature let out a howl of rage and rushed towards me. But as it reached the edge of the slab, an invisible force seemed to hold it back. It thrashed and clawed at the air, its body twisting in ways that defied natural law. Emboldened, I continued tracing the symbols, my movements becoming more sure. Words I didn't understand spilled from my lips, a chant that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside me. The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the slab began to glow with an eerie light. The creature's howls turned to screams of agony. Before my eyes, its body began to change. The bark-like skin peeled away, revealing human flesh underneath. Branches and leaves withered and fell. And in its eyes, I saw a flicker of something I recognized. Fear, yes, but also relief. As the last of the transformation faded, a man collapsed to the floor where the monster had stood. He was unconscious but breathing, his body battered but human once more. I sagged against the slab, exhaustion washing over me. Whatever I had done, it had worked. But I knew this was far from over. The journal had hinted at a larger force at work, something that controlled the forest itself. And I had a sinking feeling that by performing this ritual, I had just painted a very large target on my back. As if in response to my thoughts, a deep, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber. It didn't come from above or around me, but seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The forest was aware of what I had done, and it was angry. I knew I couldn't stay here. With shaking hands, I gathered the journal, and as many of the strange instruments from the tables as I could carry. Then, steeling myself for whatever horrors might await, I began to climb the stairs back to the world above. Emerging from the underground chamber felt like stepping into another world. The forest around the cabin had changed, becoming denser, more primordial. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches intertwining to block out most of the sky. The air was thick and heavy, filled with an oppressive silence that set my nerves on edge. I knew I had to keep moving. The unconscious man in the chamber below was evidence that there was hope for those transformed by the forest's influence. If I could find my way back to civilization, maybe I could bring help, find a way to stop whatever was happening here. But as I took my first steps away from the cabin, I realized that navigation would be nearly impossible. The landscape had shifted. Familiar landmarks twisted or simply gone. It was as if the forest itself was actively trying to confuse and disorient me. I pulled out the journal I had taken from the chamber, flipping through its pages as I walked. Most of it was indecipherable. Complex diagrams, scribbled notes in what looked like multiple languages, but one phrase kept repeating, the heart of the forest. According to the journal's author, this heart was the source of the forest's power, the nexus from which its influence spread. If I could find it, maybe I could find a way to stop this madness at its source. As I pondered this, a sound cut through the unnatural silence. Running water. Hope surged through me. If I could find a stream or river, it might lead me out of the forest. I moved towards the sound, pushing through dense underbrush. I broke through into a small clearing and froze. Before me was a sight that defied explanation. A massive tree stood at the center of the clearing, its trunk easily 20 feet in diameter. But it was no ordinary tree. Its bark pulsed with an internal light, and its branches reached out like grasping fingers. Most disturbing of all were the forms I could see half merged with the tree's surface. Animals, plants, and what I was horrified to recognize as human shapes, all slowly being absorbed into the living wood. This, I realized with a mixture of awe and terror, must be the heart of the forest. As I stood transfixed by the nightmarish sight, I became aware of movement all around me. From between the trees emerged more of the transformed creatures, part human, part plant, part animal. They moved with eerie grace, encircling me, but not attacking. A voice spoke, not with sound but directly into my mind. It was ancient, vast, and utterly alien. "You have meddled in forces beyond your comprehension, little one," it said. "You have disrupted the great work, the merging of all life into one perfect form." Images flooded my mind. Centuries of history, of the forest growing, changing, absorbing. I saw its plan, to create a new form of life, one that blended all others into a single collective consciousness. "Join us," the voice urged. "Become part of something greater than yourself. Resist and be destroyed." I felt a pull, an almost overwhelming urge to step forward, to allow myself to be embraced by the heart of the forest. Part of me yearned for it, to leave behind the complexities and pain of individual existence. But another part of me recoiled in horror. This wasn't evolution or ascension. It was extinction, the end of free will and individual consciousness. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I raised the axe I still clutched in my trembling hands. "No," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "This ends now." The forest erupted in fury. The creatures lunged forward as one, and the heart of the forest itself seemed to writhe in anger. I swung the axe in desperate arcs, knowing I was hopelessly outmatched but determined to go down fighting. As the first of the creatures reached me, a blinding light suddenly filled the clearing. The sound of engines and voices shouting broke through the forest's unnatural silence. Help had arrived, but as relief flooded through me, I knew the real battle was just beginning. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and debriefing. A search and rescue team, alerted by my prolonged absence, had mounted a massive operation to find me. They had encountered the same disorienting effects of the forest, but sheer numbers and determination had allowed them to push through. I was whisked away to a makeshift command center on the outskirts of the National Monument. As paramedics tended to my injuries, I tried to explain what I had seen and experienced. The looks of disbelief and concern on their faces told me how crazy it all sounded. But I wasn't the only one. Other rescue team members reported strange sightings, inexplicable phenomena that defied rational explanation. And then there were the transformed humans we had managed to rescue, living proof that something beyond our understanding was at work in those woods. As the sun began to set, I found myself seated across from a stern-faced woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elena Reeves, a specialist with a classified government agency. Her questions were pointed, her demeanor suggesting she knew far more than she was letting on. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice calm but intense, "I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. What you encountered in those woods is part of something much larger, something that has been going on for a very long time." She produced a file folder, spreading photographs across the table between us. I recognized some of the symbols from the underground chamber, but these images showed them in various locations around the world, carved into ancient ruins, hidden in the artwork of medieval manuscripts, even incorporated into modern corporate logos. "The force you encountered," Dr. Reeves continued, "is not confined to this forest. It's a worldwide phenomenon, a kind of sentient ecosystem that has existed alongside humanity for millennia, usually dormant, but occasionally active." My mind reeled at the implications. But why here? Why now? Dr. Reeves's expression darkened. Climate change, deforestation, the rapid loss of biodiversity. We believe these factors have triggered a kind of immune response, the living planet trying to defend itself against what it perceives as a threat. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Mr. Finch, the ritual you performed in that chamber has bought us time, but it's only a temporary solution. The forest will recover, and when it does, its reaction will be even more severe." "What can we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We fight back," she said firmly. "With knowledge, with science, and yes, with the very rituals and symbols you discovered. But we need people like you, people who have seen the truth and have the courage to face it." As Dr. Reeves spoke, I felt a weight settling onto my shoulders. I knew that by walking out of those woods, I had stepped into a much larger world, one filled with wonders and terrors beyond imagination. The life I had known was over. But as I looked at the photos spread before me, at the faces of the people we had managed to save, I knew I had no choice. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, I had to see this through. "When do we start?" I asked. Dr. Reeves allowed herself a small smile. "We already have." As night fell over the forest, I could have sworn I heard a distant angry howl. The battle for the future of humanity had begun, and I was now on the front lines. My name is Stephen Young, and I am 72 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened a few years back when I was working as a deputy in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. It's a story that still haunts me, a reminder that even in the most picturesque places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. Glenwood Springs is a quaint place, known for its hot springs and scenic views. Nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, it's the kind of town you see on postcards. Charming Main Street, friendly faces, and a sense of community that's hard to find these days. I had a pretty normal life, I guess. Married to my high school sweetheart Kelly, and father to 2 kids, Eli and Nora. We had a dog named Rusty who thought he was a lapdog despite weighing 50 pounds. Life was good, but every town has its shadows. I'd been with the Glenwood Springs Sheriff's Department for over 2 decades, and I thought I'd seen it all. Most days were filled with traffic stops, noise complaints, and the occasional lost hiker. I was okay with that. At my age, I enjoyed the peace and quiet, but all that changed on a warm day in late August. The day started like any other. I kissed Kelly goodbye, patted Rusty on the head, and headed to the station. The morning briefing was routine. A couple of speeding tickets to be issued, a noise complaint from the night before to follow up on. Nothing out of the ordinary. Around noon, I got a call that would change everything. A teenage girl named Jada Thompson from the nearby town of Carbondale hadn't come home the night before. Her parents were worried sick. We got these calls from time to time. Usually the kids were found at a friend's house or had run away for a day or two. But something about this one felt different from the start. I drove over to Carbondale to meet Jada's parents and get a feel for the situation. The Thompsons lived in a modest 2-story house with a well-kept lawn. As I pulled up, I could see Mrs. Thompson pacing on the front porch, her husband standing beside her with a hand on her shoulder. "Deputy Young," Mr. Thompson said as I approached, his voice tight with worry. "Thank you for coming so quickly." I nodded, taking out my notebook. "Can you tell me what happened?" Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, her eyes red from crying. "Jada went to her friend Amy's house to study yesterday after school. She was supposed to be home by 9, but she never showed up. We've called all her friends, but no one's seen her since she left Amy's around 8. Did she say anything about going anywhere else? Any plans you might not have known about?" I asked. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "No, Jada's a good kid. She always lets us know where she's going. This isn't like her at all." I jotted down the details, a growing sense of unease settling in my stomach. "I'm going to need a recent photo of Jada, and a list of all her friends and places she frequents. We'll start a search right away." As the Thompsons went inside to gather the information, I looked around the neighborhood. It was a quiet street, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors. But as I scanned the area, my eyes were drawn to the tree line at the end of the road. The dense forest seemed to loom over the houses, dark and forbidding. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw movement among the trees, a tall, thin figure watching from the shadows. But when I blinked, it was gone. I shook my head, chalking it up to my imagination and the stress of the situation. Little did I know, that fleeting shadow was just the beginning. Something dark had come to our quiet corner of Colorado, and nothing would ever be the same again. Back at the station, I briefed the rest of the department on Jada's disappearance. Sheriff Hodges, a gruff man in his late 50s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, listened intently as I laid out what we knew. "All right, Young," he said when I finished. "Take Wilson and start canvassing the area between the Thompsons' house and Amy's. I'll get some volunteers together to search the woods. Let's find this girl before nightfall." I nodded, grabbing my gear. Deputy Wilson, a young guy fresh out of the academy, was already waiting by the cruiser. As we drove to Carbondale, I filled him in on the details. "You think she just ran off?" Wilson asked, his voice tinged with the optimism of youth. I shook my head. "Doesn't feel like it. From what her parents say, Jolter's not the type. But let's not jump to conclusions. We follow the evidence, wherever it leads." We started our search at Amy's house, confirming Jada's movements the night before. Amy, a petite blonde with worry etched on her face, told us Jada had left around 8, planning to take a shortcut through the old rail yard to get home. "I told her not to," Amy said, her voice quavering. "That place gives me the creeps." But Jada said it was faster, and she wanted to get home to finish a paper for school. The rail yard. My stomach tightened at the mention of it. It was an abandoned place on the outskirts of town, a relic from Carbondale's mining days. Kids sometimes went there on dares or to drink away from prying eyes, but it wasn't safe. Rusty tracks, old machinery, and graffiti-covered walls made it a place most people avoided. Wilson and I headed there next. As we pulled up to the chain-link fence surrounding the property, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel under our feet as we entered through a gap in the fence. "Jesus," Wilson muttered, looking around. "This place is creepy as hell." I nodded in agreement. The rail yard stretched out before us, a maze of old train cars, dilapidated buildings, and overgrown tracks. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, creating dark corners and hidden spaces where anything or anyone could be lurking. "We'll split up," I said, unholstering my flashlight. "You take the east side, I'll take the west. Stay in radio contact, and if you see anything suspicious, you call for backup immediately. Got it?" Wilson nodded, his hand resting nervously on his holster as he headed off. I watched him go, then turned to my own section of the yard. As I walked between the rusting hulks of old train cars, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of metal, every rustle of wind through the tall grass, set my nerves on edge. I called out Jada's name periodically, but the only response was my own echo bouncing back at me. I was about to radio Wilson and suggest we regroup when something caught my eye. Near one of the old passenger cars, half hidden by weeds, was a small object. I approached cautiously, my heart rate picking up. It was a phone, its screen cracked but still intact. I picked it up, turning it over to reveal a pink case with Jada's name written in glittery letters. "Wilson," I called into my radio, my voice tense. "I've got something. East side of the yard near the old passenger cars." As I waited for Wilson to arrive, I scanned the area around where I'd found the phone. That's when I saw them. Footprints. 2 sets. One small like a teenage girl's, the other large and deep, as if belonging to someone much heavier. The prints led away from where I'd found the phone, heading towards the tree line at the edge of the property. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. This wasn't a case of a runaway teenager. Something had happened to Jada. Something terrible. Wilson arrived, out of breath from running. His eyes widened as I showed him the phone and the footprints. "Call it in," I said grimly. "We're going to need the whole department on this. And get search dogs out here ASAP." As Wilson made the call, I stared at the tree line where the footprints disappeared. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, dark and foreboding. Somewhere in there, Jada Thompson was in trouble. And we were already hours behind whoever had taken her. The search for Jada had just become a race against time, one I feared we might already be losing. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The rail yard became a hive of law enforcement as officers from our department and neighboring counties converged on the scene. Search dogs were brought in, their excited barks echoing through the abandoned lot as they picked up Jada's scent from her phone. I stood with Sheriff Hodges, watching as the search teams prepared to enter the woods. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard and making the forest ahead look even more ominous. "We should have been out here hours ago," I muttered, frustration and guilt gnawing at me. Hodges placed a hand on my shoulder. "We got here as fast as we could, young. You couldn't have known." I nodded, but his words did little to ease the knot in my stomach. As the first team of officers disappeared into the trees, their flashlights bobbing like fireflies in the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late. The search continued through the night. I joined one of the teams, pushing through dense underbrush and calling Jada's name until my throat was raw. But as the hours ticked by with no sign of the missing girl, hope began to fade. It was nearing dawn when one of the search dogs picked up a scent. We followed the excited animal deeper into the woods, our flashlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. The dog led us to a small clearing, where it began to whine and paw at the ground. My heart racing, I approached the spot. There, half buried in the leaves, was a scrap of fabric. I picked it up carefully, recognizing it as matching the description of the shirt Jada had been wearing when she disappeared. "Over here," I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. As the rest of the team converged on the clearing, I scanned the area, looking for any other signs of Jada's presence. That's when I saw it. A dark opening in the hillside, partially hidden by overgrown vines. A cave. "We need spelunking gear," I said to the team leader. "And more lights, a lot more lights." As we waited for the equipment to arrive, I stood at the mouth of the cave, shining my flashlight into its depths. The beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, revealing nothing but a yawning blackness that seemed to go on forever. A chill ran down my spine as a gust of air escaped the cave, carrying with it a musty, damp smell, and something else, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It smelled like decay. When the spelunking gear arrived, I was the first to volunteer to go in. Despite protests from some of the younger officers, I insisted. Jada had disappeared on my watch, and I was determined to be the one to find her. Strapping on a helmet with a mounted light, I prepared to enter the cave. Just before I did, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Wilson, his young face etched with concern. "Be careful in there, sir," he said. "Something about this place, it doesn't feel right." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. As I turned back to the cave entrance, I couldn't help but feel like I was about to descend into the mouth of some great beast. Whatever waited for me in the darkness ahead, I knew it would change me forever. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the cave, the darkness swallowing me whole. The air in the cave was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the warm summer night outside. My breath came out in small clouds as I made my way deeper into the earth, the beam of my headlamp barely piercing the oppressive darkness. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening into larger chambers, other times narrowing so much I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. All the while I called out Jada's name, my voice echoing back at me in a mockery of hope. I'd been in the cave for what felt like hours when I heard it, a faint sound, almost like a whimper, coming from somewhere ahead. My heart racing, I pushed forward, scrambling over fallen rocks and squeezing through tight passages. The sound grew louder as I entered a large chamber. My light swept across the rocky floor, revealing something that made my blood run cold. Scratches, dozens of them, carved into the stone. Some looked old, others frighteningly fresh. And there, in the center of it all, was a shoe, a small pink sneaker that I recognized from Jada's description. "Jada," I called out, my voice trembling. "Jada, are you here?" A movement in the shadows caught my eye. I swung my light towards it, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure, tall and unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, but when I blinked, it was gone. Shaking off the unsettling image, I moved deeper into the chamber. That's when I heard it again, a definite whimper, coming from behind a large boulder. I approached cautiously, my hand on my weapon. As I rounded the boulder, my light fell on a huddled form. It was Jada, her clothes torn and dirty, her eyes wide with fear. "Jada," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm Deputy Young. I'm here to take you home." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "He's still here," she whispered. "The tall man. He comes in the dark." A chill ran down my spine at her words. Before I could respond, a low, inhuman growl echoed through the chamber. Jada screamed, and I whirled around, my light searching frantically for the source of the sound. For a split second, my beam caught something that defied explanation. A face, if you could call it that, pale and distorted, with eyes that reflected the light like a cat's. Then it was gone, disappearing into a crevice with unnatural speed. I didn't wait to see if it would return. Scooping Jada into my arms, I ran for the cave entrance, my heart pounding in my ears. The journey back seemed to take an eternity, every shadow concealing potential horrors. When we finally burst out of the cave into the early morning light, I was met by a crowd of surprised officers. Medics rushed to take Jada while I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. As they loaded Jada into an ambulance, I recounted what I'd seen to Sheriff Hodges. He listened with a grim expression, his face pale in the dawn light. "We'll send a team back in," he said. "Whatever's in there, we need to find it." But even as he spoke, I knew we wouldn't find anything. Whatever had taken Jada, whatever I'd glimpsed in that cave, it wasn't something that would be easily caught or explained. As I watched the ambulance drive away, carrying Jada to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The tall man, as Jada had called it, was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling that Glenwood Springs hadn't seen the last of its horrors. The days following Jada's rescue were a whirlwind of activity. The media descended on Glenwood Springs like vultures, hungry for details about the girl who had survived her underground ordeal. Jada's parents were overjoyed to have her back, but the haunted look in her eyes told a story that went beyond a simple kidnapping. I spent hours at the hospital, gently questioning Jada about what had happened. Her story was fragmented, filled with gaps and inconsistencies that I attributed to the trauma she'd endured. But certain details remained consistent and deeply troubling. "He was so tall," she'd say, her voice barely above a whisper, and thin, like a shadow standing up. His arms, they were so long, and his face. She'd trail off then, her eyes distant and filled with terror. I tried to get her to describe the face, but she'd just shake her head and start to cry. Whatever she'd seen in that cave had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. We combed the cave system thoroughly, but found no trace of Jada's captor. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing but those eerie scratches on the cave walls and a lingering sense of wrongness that seemed to permeate the entire area. The official report cited an unknown assailant, possibly a transient or drifter, who had been using the caves as a hideout. But those of us who had been there, who had seen the terror in Jada's eyes and felt the unnatural chill of that place, knew there was more to the story. As the weeks passed and the media frenzy died down, life in Glenwood Springs began to return to normal. But there was an undercurrent of fear now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Parents kept a closer eye on their children, and fewer people ventured into the woods alone. For me, the case was far from closed. I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen in that cave. That pale, distorted face with its reflective eyes. It haunted my dreams, turning them into nightmares that left me waking in a cold sweat. Kelly's concerned face hovering over me. I threw myself into research, spending long hours at the station poring over old case files and folklore books. I was looking for anything that might explain what we'd encountered, any similar cases or local legends that could shed light on the mystery. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I came across something that made my blood run cold. An old newspaper article from 1952, yellowed with age and nearly falling apart. The headline read, "Local child missing, strange creature sighted in woods." The details were eerily similar to Jada's case. A young girl had disappeared while playing near the woods. Search parties had combed the area for days, until finally she was found in a cave system, traumatized but alive. And there, in the grainy black and white photo accompanying the article, was a sketch based on the girl's description of her captor. It showed an impossibly tall, thin figure with elongated limbs and a featureless face. My hands shook as I read the girl's quoted description. He was like a shadow that could walk, and his arms, they were so long. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. This couldn't be a coincidence. Whatever had taken Jada, it had been here before. It had been here for decades, maybe longer, preying on the people of Glenwood Springs. As I stared at the old newspaper, a thought occurred to me that chilled me to my core. If this thing had been here all this time, taking people every few decades, how many other missing persons cases might be connected? How many other families had lost loved ones to this entity, never knowing the truth? I knew then that my work was far from over. This case wouldn't be closed until I uncovered the full truth, no matter how terrifying it might be, because if I didn't, if I let this go, it would only be a matter of time before another child disappeared into the darkness. Little did I know my investigation was about to take me down a path darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The shadows of Glenwood Springs held secrets older and more terrible than anything I was prepared for, and uncovering them would come at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. The discovery of the 1952 article opened a floodgate. I began digging deeper into Glenwood Springs history, looking for any other incidents that might be connected. What I found was disturbing, to say the least. Every few decades there was a spike in missing persons cases, usually involving children or young adults. Most were never solved, written off as runaways or tragic accidents in the wilderness surrounding the town. But reading between the lines, I started to see a pattern. 1924. 3 children vanished over the course of a summer. One was found weeks later in a cave, babbling about a tall shadow man. 1980. A teenage couple disappeared while camping. The girl was found alive in an underground cavern, but the boy was never seen again. The girl was committed to a psychiatric facility, where she spent years drawing pictures of a elongated, faceless figure. 2001. A young boy went missing from his backyard. He was found 3 days later in the woods, physically unharmed but deeply traumatized. He refused to speak about what happened, but his parents reported that he would wake up screaming about the thin man with no face. Each incident had elements that echoed Jada's case: caves, trauma, and descriptions of an unnaturally tall, thin figure. It was too much to be coincidence. I shared my findings with Sheriff Hodges, expecting skepticism. Instead, he listened with a grim expression, nodding slowly as I laid out the pattern. "I was afraid of this," he said when I finished. At my questioning look, he sighed heavily. "Sit down, young. There's something you need to know." Over the next hour, Hodges revealed a secret that had been passed down through the sheriff's department for generations. The entity I'd glimpsed in the cave, the one that had taken Jada and so many others over the years, was known to a select few in town. They called it the Tall Man, for lack of a better name. "It's been here as long as anyone can remember," Hodges explained. "Maybe even before the town was founded. Every few decades it becomes active, taking people. We do what we can to protect the town, to keep people away from its hunting grounds, but sometimes it gets through anyway." I finished, thinking of Jada and all the others who had fallen victim to this thing. Hodges nodded. "We've tried to stop it before. In '52, after that girl was taken, a group of deputies went into the caves to hunt it down. Only one came back, and he was never the same after. Said they'd found the thing's lair, deep underground. Said it was wrong, unnatural, like looking at something that shouldn't exist in our world." I thought back to what I'd seen in the cave, that brief glimpse of a face that defied description. "Why keep this secret?" I asked. "Why not warn people? And tell them what? That there's a monster in the woods? That sometimes, for reasons we don't understand, it takes people?" Hodges shook his head. "It would cause panic. And even if people believed us, what could they do? We can't evacuate the whole town. We can't close off the entire forest." I understood his reasoning, but it didn't sit well with me. People had a right to know what they were up against, didn't they? As if reading my thoughts, Hodges leaned forward. "I'm telling you this now because I think you need to know. But be careful, young. This thing, it's dangerous in ways we don't fully understand. And I have a feeling it's not done with us yet." His words proved prophetic. Just 2 days later, another child went missing. The search began immediately, but I knew in my gut that we were already too late. The Tall Man had emerged from the shadows once again, and Glenwood Springs was about to face a terror unlike anything it had seen before. As I joined the search party heading into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Something was out there in the darkness, something ancient and hungry, and this time, I was determined to face it head on, no matter the cost. The hunt for the Tall Man had begun, and I knew that before it was over, I would have to confront horrors beyond my wildest nightmares. But for the sake of the missing child, for the sake of Glenwood Springs, I was ready to descend into the abyss once more. Little did I know, the true terror was only just beginning. The search for the missing child, a 10-year-old boy named Tyler Green, consumed the town. Volunteers poured in from neighboring communities, combing the woods and calling Tyler's name until their voices were hoarse. But as the hours ticked by with no sign of the boy, a sense of dread settled over Glenwood Springs. I knew where we needed to look, but I hesitated to suggest it. The cave system where we'd found Jada was extensive, stretching for miles under the mountains. If the Tall Man had taken Tyler there, finding him would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. But as the second day of the search dawned with no new leads, I knew we had no choice. I approached Sheriff Hodges, who had been coordinating the search efforts. "We need to go back into the caves," I said quietly. Hodges looked at me, his face lined with exhaustion and worry. "You sure about this, young? You know what we might be walking into?" I nodded grimly. "It's our best shot at finding Tyler. And maybe this time we can end this thing, once and for all." Hodges was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. Small team, best equipment we can get. And young," his eyes met mine, deadly serious. "If you see that thing, you don't engage. You call for backup immediately. Understood?" I agreed, but in my heart I knew that if I came face to face with the Tall Man again, I wouldn't be able to just walk away. Not after everything it had done. We assembled a team of 6, myself, Hodges, Wilson, and 3 experienced cavers from the local search and rescue team, equipped with the latest in spelunking gear, communication devices, and weapons. We entered the cave system as the sun was setting on the second day of Tyler's disappearance. The cave seemed different this time, more ominous. The air was thicker, harder to breathe. and I could have sworn I heard whispers echoing from the darkest corners. We pushed deeper into the earth, following the twisting passageways and marking our route carefully. Hours passed, each chamber and tunnel looking much like the last. The cave seemed to go on forever, a labyrinth of stone and shadow. Just as despair began to set in, we heard it, a faint cry echoing from somewhere ahead. "Tyler?" I called out, my voice bouncing off the cave walls. "Tyler, is that you?" Another cry, louder this time. Definitely a child's voice. We surged forward, hope giving us renewed energy, but as we entered a large cavern, the source of the cries became clear, and my blood ran cold. Tyler was there, huddled against the far wall. But he wasn't alone. Standing over him, its unnaturally long limbs bent at impossible angles, was the tall man. In the beam of our flashlights, I finally got a clear look at the creature that had haunted Glenwood Springs for generations. It was even more terrifying than I had imagined. Its body was emaciated, skin stretched tight over a frame that seemed more shadow than substance. Its arms hung nearly to the ground, ending in long, sharp fingers. And its face, God, its face. It was like looking at a void, featureless except for two large reflective eyes that seemed to swallow the light. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the tall man turned those terrible eyes on us, and all hell broke loose. It moved with impossible speed, crossing the cavern in the blink of an eye. Wilson fired his weapon, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullets seemed to pass right through the creature. "Get Tyler," I shouted, diving to the side as one of those long arms swiped at me. I rolled to my feet, drawing my own weapon, but I knew it would be useless. Hodges and one of the cavers made a dash for Tyler, while the rest of us tried to distract the tall man. It was like fighting a living shadow. Every time we thought we had it cornered, it would seem to melt into the darkness, only to reappear somewhere else. I lost track of time as we fought, the cavern a chaos of shouts, gunfire, and that awful inhuman screech the creature made. At some point, I found myself separated from the others, backed into a smaller side chamber. The tall man loomed over me, its featureless face inches from mine. I could feel its cold breath, smell the decay that clung to it. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die. But as those long fingers reached for me, something caught my eye. Behind the creature, barely visible in the dim light, was a symbol carved into the cave wall. It looked ancient, a complex pattern that seemed to hurt my eyes if I looked at it too long. Acting on instinct, I aimed my flashlight at the symbol and clicked it on. The effect was immediate and shocking. The tall man recoiled, a shriek of pain escaping it. It backed away from the light, its form seeming to waver and distort. "The symbol," I shouted to the others. "Light up the symbol." More lights joined mine, illuminating the ancient carving. The tall man writhed in apparent agony, its body stretching and twisting in ways that defied physics. And then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, it simply vanished. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, panting and shell-shocked, trying to process what had just happened. Tyler's quiet sobs broke the spell, and we rushed to the boy's side. As we made our way out of the caves, Tyler safe in Hodges' arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. We had driven the tall man away, yes, but had we truly defeated it? Or had we just bought ourselves some time? The symbol we'd found raised more questions than it answered. Who had carved it there? How long ago? And most importantly, what did it mean? As we emerged from the caves into the early morning light, I knew one thing for certain. The shadows of Glenwood Springs held deeper secrets than I had ever imagined, and I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth, no matter where it led me. The weeks following Tyler's rescue were a blur of debriefings, media interviews, and sleepless nights. The official story, carefully crafted by Sheriff Hodges, cited a disturbed individual living in the caves as the kidnapper. It was a flimsy explanation that left many questions unanswered, but it was better than the truth. Tyler, like Jada before him, was deeply traumatized by his experience. He spoke little of what had happened in the caves, but his nightmares told a story of terror beyond words. I visited him in the hospital, hoping to glean any information that might help us understand the tall man better. But the sight of the boy's haunted eyes only strengthened my resolve to put an end to this once and for all. I threw myself into research, spending every free moment investigating the symbol we'd found in the cave. I reached out to archaeologists, folklorists, anyone who might shed light on its origins. Most dismissed it as a hoax or a coincidence, but a few expressed interest. One Native American historian from a nearby university agreed to meet with me. Dr. Ava Runningbear arrived in Glenwood Springs on a crisp autumn day, her weathered face serious as I showed her my sketches of the symbol. "This is very old," she said, tracing the lines with a finger. "It belongs to a tradition far older than my people. We have stories, passed down through generations, of a tall, thin spirit that stalked the shadows, a hunger that wore a man's shape." She went on to explain that the symbol was a ward, a protection against dark forces. "But be careful," she warned as she was leaving. "These old magics, they have a cost, and the shadows do not give up their prey easily." Her words stayed with me, adding another layer to the mystery that had consumed my life. The tall man was more than just a local bogeyman. It was something ancient, something that had been haunting these lands long before Glenwood Springs was even a thought. As winter settled over the town, bringing with it long nights and deep snows, I continued my investigation. I mapped out every cave system in the area, cross-referencing them with historical disappearances and sightings. A pattern began to emerge, a cycle of activity that spanned centuries. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized how little I truly understood. The tall man defied conventional explanation. It wasn't human, wasn't even of this world, perhaps. How could we fight something like that? The answer came to me on a cold January night. I was in my study, surrounded by books and papers, when I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I looked up to see a figure standing in the corner of the room. Impossibly tall, impossibly tall. I looked up to see a figure standing in the corner of the room. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin. Its featureless face turned towards me. The tall man had come to my home. For a moment I was paralyzed with fear. Then, my years of training kicked in. I dove for my gun. But even as my hand closed around the grip, I knew it would be useless. This wasn't a fight I could win with bullets. The tall man didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me with those black reflective eyes. And then, to my shock, it spoke. Not with words, but directly into my mind. "Seeker," it said, its voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You chase shadows, but do you understand what you pursue? What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here?" The creature's head tilted, an unsettlingly human gesture on its inhuman form. "I am hunger. I am the space between moments. I am what waits in the dark when all other lights go out." Its words sent a chill down my spine, but I pressed on. "Why Glenwood Springs? Why take our children? This place, it is thin. The veil between worlds wears down here. And the young, they shine so brightly. Their fear is exquisite." I felt sick at its words, anger overriding my fear. "We stopped you," I said, "in the cave. We drove you away." The tall man's form seemed to ripple, like heat haze on a summer day. "You delayed me, nothing more. I am eternal, deputy. I was here long before your kind learned to make fire, and I will be here long after your cities have crumbled to dust." "Then why are you here now? Why show yourself to me?" The creature was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice held a note I hadn't heard before. Was it amusement? "Because you are different, Seeker. You see what others do not. You ask questions they dare not ask. And now you stand at a crossroads." It moved then, faster than my eyes could track, until it was looming over me. I could feel its cold breath on my face, smell the ancient musty scent of it. "You can turn away," it whispered. "Forget what you've seen. Live out your days in blissful ignorance. Or you can continue down this path. But know this, the truth you seek comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Before I could respond, it was gone. One moment it was there. The next, my study was empty, save for me and the lingering scent of decay. I sat there for a long time, my mind reeling from the encounter. The tall man had come to me, had spoken to me. But why? Was it a warning, a challenge, or something else entirely? As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I made my decision. I couldn't turn back now, couldn't unsee what I'd seen, or unlearn what I knew. Whatever the cost, I had to see this through to the end. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Young," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my gut. "I'm in. Whatever it takes, whatever I need to do, I want to know everything." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "All right," the voice said. "There's no going back from this, you understand? Once you're in for life." I thought of the tall man, of its words about eternity and hunger. I thought of Jada, of Tyler, of all the other victims over the years. And I thought of Glenwood Springs, the town I'd sworn to protect. "I understand," I said. "When do we start?" "Now," came the reply. "Pack a bag and be ready in an hour. We've got a lot of ground to cover and not much time." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of fear and determination settle over me. The true battle against the shadows of Glenwood Springs was just beginning, and I had a feeling it would take me to places I couldn't even imagine. But I was ready. Whatever came next, whatever horrors I had to face, I would see it through. For the sake of my town, for the sake of those who couldn't protect themselves, I would dive into the darkness and confront the monsters that lurked there. The sun was rising over the mountains as I packed my bag, casting long shadows across my room. As I looked out at the town I'd called home for so long, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever see it again? And if I did, would I be the same person who left? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The shadows of Glenwood Springs had not seen the last of Stephen Young. Not by a long shot.